dust reigns across the land. A man steps out of it, wielding a pickaxe and a sweaty brow. He carries with him artifacts of an ancient, forgotten age. Yes, that's right, the 90s and 80s. Here with me, the internet archaeologist himself, Connor Cody.
I am just one of many internet archaeologists. We are few, but our knowledge is vast.
True, but you're the one I know and that I could get on a weekend to come record with me. So
Yeah, I had to get her up early because I decided, hey, never done a podcast recording in person.
yeah, it's pretty good stuff.
I've
So
never done a podcast in general, but
oh, that's all good. Everyone's got their first time. So here's a question for you: Is what have you brought from your expeditions to share with us today?
from my expeditions, I have seen, well, what I have found is something that may shock you. The older ones in the crowd may remember these names. GI Joe, Transformers, Power Rangers, Animaniacs. I was going to talk about that for a little bit, but then I sort of decided to reformat. What I have found in these children's media is something far more adult. What I have found is politics. Yes, we've all heard that, oh, keep politics out of it. Politics is everywhere. Politics influences every form of art and media. The medium is the message, and here the message is Saturday morning cartoons.
You know, I love the image of you just like insanely standing in like a desert in Nevada somewhere, like absolutely insane out of your mind as civilization has fallen apart, and you just hold like the severed head of Optimus Prime being like, no!
Yes, Optimus Prime was. If you were alive in the '80s and you didn't have a father or an older brother, Optimus Prime was your older brother. He was your father.
God, I wish I had Optimus Prime.
It's like
Dude's dummy thick.
it's like Goku or I don't know.
Goku's more like the 90s though, ain't it?
Yeah, but yeah, but that's yeah, but we got Dragon Ball Z late, so this is
Okay, so if you were in Japan or something like that, like you could actually be seeing Optimus Goku same time period.
yeah around the same time. Although G1 Optimus, the other ones are just not the emergent ones. Because yes, I am going to talk about G1, aka the one from the '80s that everyone assumes is Sarkhan.
Ooh. You think they got any Mugen games where you can make Goku and Optimus Prime fight?
Yeah, there was a Transformers Evangelion crossover a while back.
Wow, I don't like the implications of that at all.
Yeah, there's an Evangelion versus Godzilla ride at Universal once.
Oh god. All right. A little off tangent. So what have you got to share with us with in regards to Optimus Prime and all that jazz?
Now, the Transformers were created to sell toys. Specifically, Hasbro saw a bunch of different lines of Japanese toys and thought, "Hey, we can mix these together and sell lots of these because hey, it's a cool idea." But we need a story behind them, so they just had a bunch of people. So they had people from Marvel Comics and said, "Hey, we got these cool robots from Japan. They can turn into cars and planes and other stuff. Write a story about them." And Marvel wrote a bunch of stories about them, and then they made a cartoon, and then that cartoon went into Japan. But let's not get ahead of myself. This is no joke. The actual origin story for Transformers in the Generation 1 cartoon and the slightly different Marvel comic. The Transformers were created as slaves of the Quintessence, an ancient race of alien robots, so named because their leaders had 5 faces. They overthrew the Quintessence, but then there was a schism between the robots that were built for everyday jobs, the working class, those became the Autobots, and and those were designed for military hardware. They became the Decepticons.
What about those who kind of fell in between?
Oh, the Neutralists. This is just G1 didn't really. The G1 cartoon didn't really talk about those. So
Okay. Simple story. That's what.
so it's Gnosticism combined with the Spanish Civil War, basically.
Mm. Okay, so we have this divide, and then what happens from there?
From there, there's a war that goes on for millions of years. They run out of energy, and they come to Earth Earth for our resources.
Mm.
Sources, and to continue the war and one day liberate Cybertron.
So the resources, like, is that the little cube that like is in the Michael Bay movie, or?
The Allspark was created just for the Michael Bay movie.
Okay.
The movie, each different they call them continuity families because there's many different variations. A lot of them have like different sort of story beats. Like Generation 1, they come to Earth for resources. The Unicron trilogy, Armada, Energon, and Cybertron, those are the ones I grew up with. They came to Earth to search for the Minicons. For the movies, they came to Earth for the Allspark. For animated, they came to Earth in the 22nd century, and the century. Also, the Allspark was put in there for sort of merchandises. And in the more recent ones, there's this dark energon that the Earth is a part of. Wait, hang on. What's going on?
Okay, so we have the Dark Energon, and we have the whole split continuity thing. So what's happening?
Alright, so the split continuity thing. So basically, way back, starting with Generation 1, there's all these different variations in the continuity. Like, say in the cartoon, Optimus Prime was a simple dock worker, as in dock worker who got turned into a great warrior, but in the comic, he and Megatron were gladiators who were sparring partners, and Hasbro made the brilliant decision that, to sort of make all the different contradictory stuff mixed together. The idea behind it was that every single continuity family is its own multiverse, and there's all these different variations within them because they're different universes altogether. So the comic is different from the cartoon. The British comic is different from the American comic. The Japanese version of the cartoon is different from the American version of the cartoon. And the Japanese made their own sequels to their own dub of the cartoon, and so that's its own thing. And then there's the reboot comics, and yeah, there's an entire. The multiverse is so big that there's an entire separate universe that solely exists just to keep tabs on all the different multiverses.
Interesting.
It makes and you thought Homestuck was confusing.
Here's the thing, though. I will say this between Transformers and Homestuck is that, yes, Transformers is more confusing, but that's because it wasn't written by one dude. I will say it's probably one of the most confusing works to come out of one dude.
Yeah, that's the whole thing about these sort of these 80s toy-based franchises. They weren't created by a single person. They were all created by different people sort of chipping in. Most of it, Bob Budiansky of Marvel Comics, he came up with most of the basic outline, but before that, Jim Shooter came up with the plot after he asked another writer of Marvel to come up with a story and names, and apparently that one was so terrible that the only thing that survives from that one is the name Optimus Prime.
Okay. Honestly, Optimus Prime, even it sounds cool, but it's also like a mouthful. I'm not crazy about it either, so I can get why they didn't keep them.
And the original Japanese name it was Convoy. The Japanese dub renamed him Convoy.
Okay, is that why that Japanese game that gives you seizures is called
Yeah, the Mystery
Convoy?
of Convoy. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Although in the Japanese dub of the movie, he's Optimus Prime again.
Interesting. That's a little peculiar. So, with all this, let's say we take all these continuities and mix them together. Um, D&D has a lot of continuities like this as well, where it just completely fractures over time and breaks into a million pieces.
Yeah.
So let's say I wanted to, you know, what are my options if I wanted to set a story in a place like this and I wanted to rend something out of it that was usable?
Well, basically, I wouldn't be afraid to sort of mix and match stuff from the stuff I like, because like I like so, because I like some elements of take Transformers. I like some elements of Generation One, but there's other stuff that I'm just kind of like, okay, what were you thinking there?
Well, what do you like about Generation 1?
Like the thing I like about Generation One is that one, I like the comics, especially the British Marvel
Hmm.
comics, but and there are some cool bits of story of the cartoon, there's still a sort of mercenariness to the Enterprise,
Hmm.
to
So,
the Enterprise, while Michael while I do like some of Michael Bay's visual stylings, the movies just leave a sour taste in my mouth.
hmm.
The movies aren't Generation One; they're different, but I was bringing up like there's stuff in every continuity for everyone, basically.
Hmm. So,
So if I were a dungeon master, I wouldn't be afraid to sort of bend things a little.
and and let's be clear, we are talking about like, you walk down an ancient ruin and Optimus Prime busts down the door. Obviously, you want it to be the high quality Generation 1 Optimus Prime.
Everyone's got a famous favorite Optimus. I'm not saying we aren't talking about like any crossovers or anything. Although
Well,
don't be
crossovers are welcome.
don't be afraid of that either. Just the thing I was talking about is never be afraid of multiverses.
Hmm.
Just fig, just and don't really bother too much of trying to slot things into multiverses. That's for other people to figure out.
Well, okay, so
It's like the Zelda timeline.
so you know how things like Marvel and DC have like these complex multiverse webs.
Actually, it's funny. Transformers is in the Marvel multiverse.
Yeah, yeah. So D&D actually does have its own sort of basically a three-way tool set to sort of get in things from alternate universes if you still want to keep within lore.
Yeah.
So you have the option to use Ravenloft, which sort of is a sort of dark zone
Mm-hmm.
of sort of like an evil world where people are taken for punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And like the idea of Ravenloft is that it eats in entire chunks of worlds at a time. So that's one way to bring him in. You have Planescape, which almost works like Dungeons and Dragons Star Trek, where you have like these ships, and you can just go to different solar systems, what we call in the game crystal spheres.
Wasn't that Windjammer?
Uh, I don't know. I think Windjammer and Spelljammer are the same thing.
Oh, that's what I meant.
But don't quote me on that. Okay.
Spelljammer, that's what I was talking about.
Yes, Spelljammer is D&D Star Trek. And then the third option for getting stuff in from alternate universes, and my favorite by far, is Planescape.
Yeah.
With the basically floating New York that has infinite portals to infinite places. You can just bring in whatever you want using Planescape.
Yeah, actually, there are things in Transformers that exist in every multiverse at once, and the two ones that are for sure are Unicron and Primus, and the other one is, and I swear to God this is true, a bar on Cybertron.
Okay.
McAdam's old oil house. So basically, don't be afraid to put your multiverse portals in places people wouldn't expect.
Oh, that is the form and function of Planescape, is putting portals where people don't expect.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that would. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of that in there. So
So if you're looking for a way to get Decepticons to fight with, like, your adventuring party, there are tool sets to do it, and our lore archaeologist will find you a way to get them there. Don't you worry.
Yeah, find it. Yeah, get McAdams. Yeah, McAdams' old oil house. Now, old oil house opening a new location, the Tomb of Horrors. Yes, that's what's behind the Spear of Oblivion in the statue's mouth.
You know what though? I like it though. Here's
Yeah.
the thing. That is just the amount of chaos I think that any good adventuring party needs. Is like, yeah, why not? We're fighting Decepticons now. Use template of Iron Golems, give them flight, there we go, boom.
Yeah.
It's a high level enemy.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, man. We're just kind of mixing stuff from both of our wheelhouses. I'm like casual D&D. I know some of the stuff through osmosis.
Well, I mean, like, here's the thing, is we both have these sort of niches that we can take, and we can just sort of boil it into this eclectic witch's cauldron of lore and nonsense. That it's got to be good, whatever comes out.
Yeah, man.
You might not be able to identify it, but it'll be
just
good.
say something until something good comes out.
Exactly. And you know what? If what comes out is like adventure maps in Optimus Prime, that's what came out.
Oh, and speaking of multiverse, the 80s GI Joe is totally set in the same universe as Transformers Generation 1. Like an old Cobra Commander even appeared in an episode.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually reminds me of, this is no joke, this was in the Marvel Comics, this was Cobra Commander's origin story. He was a failed used car salesman who blamed the government for the failure of his business and the death of his brother, who amassed fame and fortune through a pyramid scheme and took over an entire small town. So basically, think a mix of Marvin Keymeyer, Osama bin Laden, and Michael Douglas in Falling Down.
God, that is a mix and a half. All right. So, on that note, then how does Joe work? Like, obviously, you were talking about the 80s cartoon stuff being an absolute mess of different people contributing different things. So you've talked about how Transformers one is a mess and what it looks like. What's the Joe one looking like? Give me the status on that.
The Joe one is kind of, well, GI Joe already existed before the 80s cartoon because, there was the old school 12-inch plastic ones from the 60s, the ones my dad played with. That one, he was basically, straight up standard World War II era GI. And then in the 70s, after Vietnam, they sort of changed it to be a generic adventure team, and they gave him a beard and kung fu grip, which is basically marketing speak of saying, "Hi, I can hold things." It wasn't until the 80s that they rebooted it, and they decided to make a Cobra. And actually, Hasbro wasn't too keen on making Cobra because they didn't think kids would buy bad guys. But they were like, well, what is GI Joe going to fight? Oh, we were thinking that kids were gonna use GI Joe and fight their Star Wars figurines. There's a crossover I'd like to see. But in the cartoon, Cobra had a completely different origin story. The writer Buzz Dixon said that originally he had this plot twist that Cobra Commander had taken over the organization from the original guy who was a philosopher who he described as a mix of Marx and Nietzsche, and that Cobra Commander took over the organization, had him imprisoned in the Arctic, and had completely subverted his original good philosophy for his own ends. So basically, it's Stalin as viewed by Trotskyists and lefcons.
I mean, let's be real. It's the 80s, you gotta put some red bashing in there, whatever you do.
It's weird. The Soviet. It's weird. If you actually look at the old GI Joe stuff in the 80s, yes, the Joes fought with the Soviets on occasion, but the Soviets, the Chinese, and the Vietnamese, they would help the Joes as much as hurt them because Cobra was the bigger threat.
Okay. So what is Cobra then? Because obviously you talked about, their ideology and their leader, but like what's their goal? What are they?
Take over the world. Like Cobra was deliberately designed to be as apolitical as a villain could be.
Okay, so it doesn't have the...
They were like Spectre and James Bond.
So
they were of no party and clique, just pure evil.
Okay. So it doesn't have sort of the metaphorical backstory that,
Transformers has.
Yeah, exactly.
Although, but the comic book had the interesting twist where, Cobra Commander was an American. He was a failed small business owner who got rich, who got the money to his weapons through a series of pyramid schemes.
So, wait, doesn't that make him not a failed business owner anymore? Just makes him sound like he runs Herbalife.
His legitimate business failed. He had to go to shady means.
Okay.
Also, fun fact, Cobra Commander was modeled after William F. Buckley.
So...
Cobra, retreat!
Cobra Commander, not MLM like Marxist-Leninist. No, MLM is in multi-level marketing.
Yeah. on the comic, but the cartoon had a completely different origin story where, like, there was an ancient society called Cobra Law.
Wait, okay. So, like...
it goes downhill when you have to incorporate magical ancient civilizations into evil terrorist groups.
I don't know, I think that sounds pretty good. What are you talking about? That's most terrorist groups if we're being real.
Yeah, but Cobra Law! That was supposed to be a placeholder name, but until they came up with a better one, and Hasbro was like, no, it's good, and everyone was like, no.
So, is Cobra Law, like... Is it, like, ancient Assyrian type stuff?
It's like in the Himalayas. The original founder of Cobra Law, Emperor Serpentor, came out from hiding and turned Cobra Commander into an actual Cobra. And Destro had to carry him around while Cobra kept screaming, "Was once a man! Was once a man!"
Oh, God. Okay, you know what, though? That gives me amazing ideas for things to throw, like, players into.
Never be afraid to throw a curveball.
Yes, what do these ancient ruins read, Mr. Wizard? It says, "Go, Joe." What does that mean? Oh, God, it's so good, though. It's so good. I love everything and more about all this.
Yeah, this is like... Yeah, all this different design by committee stuff. Sometimes you get people on the committee with like wildly clashing views, and that's how we get stuff like, Cobra Commander, the generic terrorist type. Oh yeah, he's the last scion of an ancient civilization.
You know what though? So here's an idea. Here we are. You go into the ancient jungle ruins, right? And you meet the Yuan-Ti snake people, right? And they're wearing weird hoods, and you're like, what ritual are they trying to summon? And like, throughout the adventure, you're wondering what they're trying to open a portal to somewhere. So you find out at the end that they have opened a portal, and they have brought the Cobra Commanders into Faerun, and boom, there you go. Best crossover I have heard in a long time. Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite one of these different, designed by committee stories was He-Man, because He-Man was like, He-Man doesn't have defined lore as much as it was just like, okay, He-Man was basically the designated boy toy line at Mattel, and Mattel would basically throw any idea that they thought boys would like into it. So we got, like, swords and barbarians, but also, like, laser guns and aliens and dinosaurs.
You know what, though? I kind of like the anarchical structure of something like that, because it just creates such a good environment where anything can happen.
Yeah, He-Man is, like, if you ran a D&D campaign on that kind of rules, it would just be the craziest goddamn thing ever.
Well, honestly, like, out of all the three things we've talked about so far, He-Man is by far the best fit, because, what is it? We've got Skeletor, a lich, there we go, boom, done. We've got He-Man, a barbarian who has taken a few levels into Paladin as well. We've got, tigers are large creatures, so they technically can be used as mounts by medium creatures, which He-Man is.
But,
it works. It just works. It just works.
Yeah, He-Man was just like, it was like D&D, the movie Heavy Metal, just everything was mixed together. It was kind of like a kitchen sink property, and that's why I think. I mean, outside of She-Ra and the live-action movie that will probably never come out, we're probably never going to see a big full-scale revival because people expect like more structure and lore instead of this chaotic sort of, oh yeah, he's a barbarian, but there's also lasers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, so the She-Ra reboot that's happening right now is completely unconnected from He-Man. What's going on with
Okay,
that?
so basically, as part of this weird, the producers of the She-Ra, it's produced by DreamWorks. DreamWorks own the rights to, they basically own the rights to He-Man and She-Ra, and they can put those which they like, but they can't make any new He-Man stuff because Sony has the He-Man rights, and they were gonna make and they're making a live action movie out of it. So the She-Ra thing is outside of a couple of nods for longtime fans, mostly unconnected.
Interesting. I I think that works for what they're doing, and I think honestly it's it just works.
Honestly,
I'm repeating myself, but it just works.
yep. Honestly, the original '80s She-Ra cartoon was better than the He-Man cartoon because it had more of the mix and match elements, but it also had more tighter storytelling.
Hmm.
Also, Hordak was a more intimidating villain.
I am not familiar with him, so what is he like?
Hordak is like he's the leader of the evil horde. He's like Skeletor but competent, basically,
Okay,
and with a much more badass voice.
all right. Though, like, again, this does just raise so many good opportunities to just, like, yeah, you find a magical sword in the woods. Turns out, yes, in fact, it is haunted by the spirit of He-Man, and he will be giving you advice from here on out. It's great. Well, there are rules for artifact weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So, an artifact weapon basically, I think it was introduced in 4.0, is if you do things the weapon likes or the artifact likes, it gets stronger over time. So if you act in a way, if you have a sword that is like of He-Man's spirit, like his I have the power sword, and you do things He-Man likes, then He-Man will be like empowering your sword and you will get more buff and more like the man himself.
Yeah, that's honestly, I'm surprised that there wasn't like a specifically licensed He-Man RPG. I mean, I know T. I mean, this was before Hasbro bought TSR and Wizards of the Coast, so they could probably get away with it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's wild. I mean, all these things just connect so well.
Yeah,
But yeah, thanks for having me. Let's try that again. Yeah, thanks for having you on, and we will see what new horrible things we can mix together in a unviable way next time we have you on. Sound good?
sounds good.